I have not been to a Cursillo, but I have known my whole life people that have been very active in Cursillo. And it's language that it works on in a way that we rarely work in the Episcopal Church, which is why I wanted to be here with you. And yesterday I was in Long Beach, I keep getting this wrong, in Long Beach, in California, with a project that's brand new called the Reformation Project, which is evangelicals, so young evangelicals, really young, in a way that we are not in the Episcopal Church. I don't know how we'd find that many young people, frankly, in our church. It's a room of 400 or 500 people working on what inclusion would look like for evangelicals. So Bible, stuff that frankly isn't my fight, not really the language I know, but that's what I was doing yesterday. So this is probably in some ways the opposite extreme, except that it's the exact same conversation in some ways, isn't it? What evangelicals get right and what Cursillo gets right is that the life of faith is deeply personal. There has been a transformational experience in your life, which is what you all share in common with each other, through Cursillo. There might have been others as well, but transformational and personal, right? It's the thing that if we handle wrong or not as skillfully as we'd like, turns us in on ourselves and makes us cliquey. Again, I'd say evangelicals and Cursillo and Episcopalians, we do this, right? There's this thing we do on Sunday and you just wouldn't understand if you don't do it with us, but if you did it, it's really good. It's kind of an odd sell in some ways, except that it's sort of what the gospel calls us to. And so what I want to talk to you today is, as you probably heard about me, I have one drum and one stick and I beat it all the time. I care about social justice. And I think you should and you do as well. So I'm going to talk about that, but I want to talk about specifically what Cursillo might bring to an understanding of the role of social justice in the church and what that has to do with welcome, which is what I'm supposed to talk about. Welcome. I think it's all the same thing, frankly. So one, you've all probably heard this Mary Oliver line, the poem that concludes, "What will you do with your one wild and precious life?" That's the question for Christians. Now the truth is, your church needs a lot from you, I suspect, wherever you come from and wherever you're in church, right? And you're aware of that, right? You know that. The people with the collars, the people not wearing their collars tonight, and the people that don't have them. You know your church needs a lot from you. My experience is rarely do we ask people what they need from us, the church. And I mean today to ask you. I'm not giving you another task. Go out there and figure out what people need from the church. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you for you. If life is short, and we know it is, this is the one you get. And the things that move your heart, the things that you love, the things that you care a lot about, the things that you are passionate about, no matter how foolish they are, that God has made you for that on purpose. Those quirks are you, whether it's knitting or social justice, whatever it is, that God has made you that person. I am curious to know if what you do in the church and for the church, that again has a lot of need from us, aligns with the things that move your heart the most and give you life. I hope your life in the church is not like one of those jobs that many of our folks do where you get through it and you get it done so that you can have the evenings and the weekends and pay the bills. I hope your life in church is connected to the thing that you are most passionate about. So of course, in Cursillo, the starting point is, who are you in Christ, right? What has Christ made you for? What is the work of your redemption and your salvation? Where are you going? What has made you? Who do you want to become? But as you're doing all that, you know, right? I know you know that there are things that you love. Now your church might need somebody to hand out the bulletins. I'm just guessing. That might not be your heart's passion. And if it is, that's cool. That's actually awesome. We need someone to do that. But isn't the nature of being a good person in the world, and we are, that we try to do those things that the church needs from us, that our families need from us, that the world needs from us? You want to keep things going. I think the tragedy is that so many of us are doing things that make us miserable, or at least don't give us life. That we find ourselves asking other people to do things that make them miserable, or don't give them life. And then we wonder why nobody wants to come join us, because we're really welcoming about it. You know it's true. You all know what I'm talking about. We don't want to welcome people to misery, to our failure. We don't want to welcome people, I think, to what we can't figure out and then blame them for not helping us figure it out. We have such deep and profound gifts in our tradition. But we don't even have to align ourselves with those things. The truth is, it's about what you are passionate about, what draws you. What if you believed that God works in you, as you are? The world has problems, your job has problems, your life has problems, the church has problems. But what if you really believed that this short life that you get, God is working in you? And maybe not only in what you get to do in the church that the church needs you for. What if the church was you, passionate about what you love? All of you, all the yous. So what I learned from the evangelicals, I always learn a lot from the evangelicals. I have not one evangelical bone in my body. My family is from Kerala in South India. We are Orthodox. Our story is that Thomas came in 52 or 54, I can never get this right, and converted 52 or 54 families. I can't remember which one it is. And it's likely, because around 70 or 80, after the fall of the temple, Jews came to Cranganore in Kerala, and it's documented. That's actually on paper. We have that. So it's as likely that Thomas came a couple of decades before. Could totally have happened. Not an evangelical bone in our body. The Reformation didn't hit us until like the 1800s or so. It came with missionaries, and it wasn't, frankly, that compelling to most people. We're still all Orthodox there. So I was listening to the evangelicals and what they get right. What they get really right, and it's something that we get right as well when we get it right, is they believe that God, through Jesus, is for them, comes to them, loves them as they are, demands things, asks for a best self, but comes to them. One of the things I think that in our framework we can lose sight of sometimes is we act as though God comes to the church. And God does, right? That is actually what we believe. But in the end, the church is the lay people, it's the people. And God comes to the church through those people. I think not through our institutions, not through our structures necessarily, though I'm a big believer in our structures and governance, but through you. So I'm curious if you have thought about whether you are doing things in your church that come out of your deepest passions. I just want you to think about it. And I hope that you'll take this back to your church. Don't fill your life in church with things you hate. And if you're on the vestry and you hate being on the vestry, I think you should think about that.
But I'm the rector.
Think about that. There's a conference called Credo. I think you should, I am completely serious. The bishops know that every Saturday that they spend on a conflict in the Diocese of Long Island or New York or wherever is a Saturday they would never get back with their families, ever. Right? Amen. And why do we pretend this is normal and right? I'm completely serious. And I think this has to do with this is to me the connecting point between why we fail at our work of social justice. It's not one more task on the list of things that the church is supposed to do that we want you to get done even though you're already exhausted. It's not a committee task that you should do even though you're doing everything else, holding everything up by yourself. We create the conflict that we have among us. We create the distress and the fighting because we're unhappy in these places. And frankly, I don't care a lot if you're unhappy in your life. I hope you're not. I hope your day-to-day is happy. But life is complicated. That's just true. There's just stuff coming at us all the time. My parents are old and I worry that they're going to get sick and it's going to be any minute. And I'm going to have to figure out how to change everything to care for them. We all carry things like that, right? And we carry them sometimes for decades. Life is hard. But the church is supposed to be a place of joy and transformation that is so compelling to all of us that we cannot help but welcome people out of love because we love them. And wouldn't we want the same beauty for them as well? So here's my example, a recent example I had. I went to Kerala. I went to India twice this summer. I was really lucky. But I went in September. This is something I had wanted to do my entire adult life, like 25 years, and could never find the time to do. They celebrate the Nativity of Mary on September 8th at my mother's family's home church in Manarkat, a place called Manarkat. That church, according to stones and slabs with writing, because of the text, is at least 1,000 years old. There is text that would have been the kind of script in Malayalam that would have been used at about 900 or so. So it's from about that time. Mind-blowing, even to someone like me from that place. The idea of a church being on that same spot for that long and still active, mind-blowing. And frankly, having grown up in the US, if an Episcopal church was like that, it would be pretty dead, probably. It would be so hugely expensive to keep that roof on, and those pilgrims that come once a year, it would be a nightmare. Can you imagine being on those committees, dealing with that church from 900? Oh, it makes my head hurt to just think about it. So this festival that happens, people come from the 1st to the 8th of September. They prepared for 3 million this year. It was on their website. Yeah, it makes it the largest religious procession in Asia. Now let's remember Asia, not an overwhelmingly Christian place. The Hajj happens in Asia. You've seen images, I'm sure, of huge Hindu festivals in India that are larger than anything I've ever seen Christians do. So actually the largest religious procession in Asia happens at St. Mary's Church in Manargat in Kerala. It's an Orthodox Christian procession. It's Christian people carrying umbrellas. They're beautiful, these kind of wooden sticks with parasol-like tops, and they're pink and gold and orange and red. They have tassels of gold on them. And there are hundreds of thousands of people walking through the town, just a couple of miles, making this huge procession around the town with drums and musicians, with loudspeakers playing the stuff coming out of the church all day, walking through, and you carry the parasol because it is a sign of your prayer. So again, I go into church mode, like, where do they store all these parasols all year? How are all these people going to eat? Where are they sleeping? How do you even make this work logistically? So usually when I sit in an Episcopal church, I'm looking around to see how the sound system works and if the lighting really works, and I'm doing what you all do, like how does this compare to what I'm used to? Can we do some of these things? That's what I went to do in Manargat. I meant to be a part of the pilgrimage, but I also know this is what I do. How do you feed 3 million people over 8 days, right? How does that work? And I had been told it was a festival of women. So people come and fast, which means we eat rice and lentils. There's no animal products. And they make offering and prayer. People literally carry their crippled children, sometimes adult children living with disability or with mental illness. People that you rarely see in public in that community are carried in for special prayer there. Lots of people who are disabled are there. And I had been told that it was overwhelmingly women. So I walk up the first day, and there were people everywhere, all over this church that I visited since I was a small child. And I remember thinking, it doesn't actually look that different, except it's really full. Like, what's going on? Oh, maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's not all women. Maybe people were lying to me. So I went back and it took me a couple of days, and I'm going to chalk this a little bit up to jet lag as well, to realize the reason it wasn't unusual, because it was packed. There were people everywhere, is that the church is usually majority women, isn't it? It looked like church, is what it did, just a lot more people. So that was my first, like, of course, this is what church looks like, everywhere. The second was that there were people of all ages, from the youngest, the people that could come with parents that would have been dragged there, to young adults, teenagers, people my age, people younger than me, people in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, which I expected to see, of all ages. And people of all ages were leading different components of this week. These were the committees of the church. I cannot imagine what it would have taken, again, to organize logistically this enormous thing. But there were these groups of people wearing badges, just like we do, organizing how you feed 3 million people over the course of 8 days. And it was volunteers. There were people standing up and just cooking, cranking it out around the clock for days. There was a procession around the church, and they were constantly processing around the church. It was all young men. Frankly, the people that we all just wish we could get into our churches, that age, right? Probably 13 or 14, 22, 23. The people in their later 20s were leading the younger ones. And the reason it was all young men is that they had these vats that were bigger than the top of this table, that were some kind of metal. They were enormous. And they were going to be cooking kind of a custard in them at the end, a pudding, which was the final offering and celebration. They were huge and heavy. And as they processed around with drums and everyone together, only young men would even think to do this, because you know they made it up. They would count and fling the thing into the air. And they were, and then catch it, and you'd hear the guy shout to bend your knees, basically, and catch this thing, and then laugh and process and go a little bit further. And I was trying to figure out why it was so beautiful. And it was because I have never seen anything like that in our church. Have you? Like a bunch of guys, from the community. These are neighborhood kids. These weren't a polished batch of guys. These are the guys you dream of in your church, being led by each other to literally, to just honor this vessel that would be used to prepare food to offer to all of the pilgrims that came. And so beside that amazing procession around the church that went around, which was actually physically really difficult, and so just fun for them, I think, because it was hard. And I'm assuming a lot of them, their backs hurt the next day. I don't know, I would assume. It looked really tricky. People were walking with these parasols, walking around the church every day. Young families, old families, women by themselves, men by themselves, every age, young men, young women, the people that don't come to our churches, walking with these parasols and saying prayers. They'd go around 3 times. So you pick them up, you pay for them, and you say your prayers and finish. Again, I was thinking, such a traditional devotion. And you could tell from what they were wearing that these were people there were some people that were very traditional and from a village in traditional clothes. And there were people that clearly probably were professionals in the city and worked in IT and finance, did all kinds of things. It cut across every barrier that you could think of in the community. There were visibly Hindus, Catholics, Orthodox people, Protestant people. I was told there were Muslims, but we couldn't tell because they dressed like the Orthodox people, had come to make these prayers. Can you think of a place in this country that is considered by so many people to be holy, that they would come and show up and participate in its rites? I actually can't. Maybe you can. So I went because I had heard these stories about this place, and they have this relic of the Veil of Mary, which is it has come recently, and the big reveal is you do 7 days of prayers. There's services all day, there's Eucharist all day. There's definitely all the priests and bishops up front doing beautiful liturgy that seems sort of on the side, frankly, because there's so many people everywhere else. At the end of it all, you do this huge procession through the town. The next day, they open the painting. That's it. That for 7 days, a painting of Mother Mary, as they call her, and Jesus, it's just an image of the Madonna that looks like a person from Kerala, is opened, and that's it. They open it, and they keep it open for 7 days. That's literally it. I thought we'd get to see the veil, or I don't know what I thought. There'd be fireworks or something. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. There were fireworks later. But in that moment when they opened the veil, you could hear this gasp. Not the veil, sorry, the painting. There was this surge forward. My mother and I were in it, and you were pushed forward with everyone else, literally reaching for this image that none of us were going to get anywhere near, because it's way up on the altar. None of us were going to get close to it. People were lunging at the television screens and at the big jumbotron to touch it, even vicariously through the screen. Every age, every gender, every religion was represented in that place. I think our churches should be like that. Now, I know we're not going to get people to process around them with umbrellas, and I know we're not going to throw bowls in the air. I get that part. I'm not asking us to become Asian and Orthodox, though the Thomas story is very good. It's really good. But what that place has down, that I think is who we mean to be as well, is everyone believes, everyone, that it is a holy place, that it can hold their intentions and their need and their pain. And you know those families come back year after year with that sick kid or sick parent. You know they do. And they believe that it is a holy place. And somehow across generations, people that you know are fighting with their parents about what they're going to do with their lives, what they care about, what they see in public life, and disagree, show up and believe that there's something for them there. And a couple of times a year, literally everyone does, regardless of your faith or experience or your other commitments, everyone does. Now, it would look different in this country if we acted in that way, but I think we could actually do that. I think we as church, as the Episcopal Church, could be a place and should be a place, are called to be a place, and maybe even in this political climate are the desperately needed places that people believe that holiness can be found, that their needs would be taken seriously, that the place is for them, even if it can't produce anything that seems to solve the actual problems that they have in their day-to-day life. The solution is not to solve the problem. That church isn't running a hospital in the church. They do run a hospital down the street because they're amazing, but they don't run a hospital in that church. People just know to bring their need to that place. So at a place like St. Mary's that has always worked and always thrived, they've never had to do a big rethink about how we get back to that. But we actually do as the Episcopal Church. It's just true. We are often, most of us, and you can just raise your hand if you're in a different place than I've been in most of my work, we're in places that are really struggling with who they are and how they are to be in their neighborhood, what it means to thrive and be important to the community they're in, and how to be faithful. If that's not your experience, I'm so happy for you, but it's mine. What we get wrong, I think, is what we got wrong at St. Mark's when I got there. This was the quirkiest church I had ever met. And I shared all of their core values. They're progressive and cool and artistic, and they were cool, I liked them. But they literally had done, and it was visible because they were so progressive, everything was so different there, that you could see almost what we were all doing straight. It was almost a lens on how strange much of what we do is in the church. They had been doing basically a version of the same thing for about 40 years. From about this, I think the mid-70s, 80s. And the church had just been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They'd been renting out more and more space, needing more income from rental and other ways, having less and less funding for clergy and programming, until they had almost nothing, before I got there, but definitely when I got there. You all know stories like this. But what was great and so visible at a St. Mark's is they were really clear, and I love this church, I love these people, that it was really important that we keep doing pretty much everything we've been doing, because that's who we are. It doesn't matter that there are 12 of us. It's who we are. And there were literally about 12, like the disciples. This is how we do Eucharist. It was pretty creative and unusual, so it was visible that it was kind of quirky that we were saying, we have to keep doing exactly what we do. And if we change anything, basically said to me very directly, who are we if we change? So what we did, I didn't actually change anything. I played around with around the edges, but I didn't actually change much. We just talked about who we were as people. This is a church that would have always said, we are welcoming. We welcome everyone. You're welcome to come in. The doors are open. We are nice people. We are always kind, we think, to ourselves at least. We know we're good. But interestingly, no one in the community had got that message for about 40 years. A couple of people. Come on, and we laugh because we do it, right? For about 40 years, a couple of new members here and there, nobody lasted that long. 40 years. Some people moved away, but interestingly, often when people move away, they still come to church. We didn't have a lot of that. But we were welcoming, they were sure. They were absolutely sure. And they weren't people, with their back to the community. They cared about social justice. But interestingly, all those things lined up. And the place was empty and broken and dingy and hurting, and the diocese knew it. Everyone knew it. And the community took that to mean people were out to get us. You know exactly what I mean. That's why you can laugh, right? People were out to get them because they disagreed with them. So it's interesting to go into that place because I come from, frankly, in Indian churches like the ones I come from, there's not an empty Orthodox church. There's no Orthodox church trying to figure out in Dallas, Texas, where I grew up, or even in New York, how do you fill these pews? Those Indian Orthodox churches, which are old-fashioned, not in English, not even in Malayalam, we don't speak that language, packed. Now, I'm not going to say, I'm not here to say those churches have a secret that we all need to know, but I think they point us to something. So I go to this church that's empty and think that doesn't feel like church to me. That's not how I know how to do church. And so what we talked about for years, again, my one drum, my one stick, is you are here because something has transformed your life. Maybe at this circle table at communion, maybe because of the pastoral care of one of the clergy people here, something has changed you. I hope you're not here because you're petty and small and angry and want to hold on to this thing. I hope not. I'm going to believe there's something here that has transformed your life. And the gospel tells us that if you believe that, if that has happened to you through Jesus the Christ, that you are called to go share that good news. So what I can promise you is to walk around our neighborhood and meet everyone. I can promise you to put up a really, a website that's easy to see, to make it easy to figure out how to join us. I can promise you that I'll be really active on social media. But when people walk through these doors because we did all those things, you have to treat them like God's gift to St. Mark's and the Bowery. You gotta love them like you wanted to be loved the first time you walked in here, and I can sort of guess you weren't. You just gotta do it. That's all you gotta do. It's like an hour and a half of your time. That's it. And people did it. Some people did it after the first week that they were there. Said, if you don't want to stand up and announce yourself as a guest, then you're in it with us. Make sure if you see someone new, or if you're not sure, don't worry about offending them. Welcome them. It was really simple. And the biggest fights that we had, they were just fights, like old school fights. They were not very genteel. Were about these changes that shouldn't have mattered, but they're the same fights that you guys have in your church. Put money on it. Where we're going to have coffee hour. Yeah. But we fought about it. We fought because literally nobody was coming to coffee hour. We had this conversation at church. Nobody was coming. And they were fools for not coming, or they didn't want to be in the community. So we'll keep doing it the way we do it because clearly these people are terrible and don't want to come to coffee hour. So we put it on the table in the middle of the room, which is our altar at St. Mark's. It was the Eucharistic table. And strangely, thank God it happened this way because I would have been in a lot of trouble if it hadn't, but strangely, everybody stayed for coffee hour. Literally everybody. Because we didn't ask them to do anything hard. It would have been harder to walk out of the room, right? To walk by me and leave. So the whole room stayed, and it was loud, and they ate donuts and ice cream in the middle of the church. It was really messy and stressful for some people, but everybody stayed. And no one, well, one person, had the nerve to say, we don't want that in our church. We don't want it full of people having a nice time and laughing and meeting each other after church. Because even if they thought that, and I think some did, you wouldn't say that in church, right? One person did, but no one was surprised by that. So, right? Yeah, we all have that. And maybe you're here. I don't know. But I'm here. I'm talking about very light things, but these are the game changers in our church. The church is not our clergy. It's not people like me. We are at a little bit of a distance. The bishops are at a huge distance. We're all doing the best we can, but we are limited humans, as you know. The lay people way outnumber us. You are the church. And if we are dragging you into structures that are tedious and harmful to you and destroying your soul, the church is failing. Now, good governance is important. It's important that we do things right. But the most important part is that you that are the church, the people sitting in those pews, showing up, doing all the work of the church, are doing it connected to your deepest passions. I'm completely serious about that. If that is not happening for you, figure it out in your church. Just start a conversation if you have to. But this is the spark of the divine in you. If you're leaving that at home, or if you don't even have time to find it, because you're so busy doing the work for your church, it's no surprise that our churches struggle. Just not. So cliques are hard, and the word is hard because it makes us feel like we're doing something that's really cruel, but it just means that we're hanging out with our friends that we're comfortable with. There is nothing wrong with that in and of itself. It's just that church isn't supposed to be that. So at St. Mark's, as people started to come, and there were all kinds of people, and it was a little complicated, what was most complicated for us in our radical welcome was not the people that were on the street or living with mental illness. We nailed that. We knew how to do that. We knew what to do if you were difficult in the middle of service. We were beautiful and compassionate about that. We were really good with the developmentally disabled woman who bought the pita for Sunday because it was one of her favorite tasks of the week. And sometimes it meant there was garlic or nuts in communion that week. We were really good and generous with that. What we struggled with is that lots of folks started to come who actually lived in our neighborhood. In our neighborhood in the East Village in Manhattan, you gotta have a lot of money to move into that neighborhood now. So we had the folks that were in group houses, and we had the folks that had been there a long time. We started to get professional young adults, and they did cool work. They're interesting people. But they were not who St. Mark's and the Bowery had thought they were. And we weren't unkind to them as a community, but I absolutely did hear one of our former clergy on staff ask one of the guys how he slept at night considering the work he did during the day. Yeah. Yeah, again, easy to laugh at, and also you can kind of see it happening in some version, maybe a different version, in many of our churches, right? You can kind of see it. Like, you can laugh at our version, and it's fair to laugh. You should laugh at it. It's horrible. But there's a version of that for most of us. So we kept growing with those folks, all kinds of people. People just started to come. And I can tell you right now, no priest is responsible for that. You can't hold that by yourself. You can't create 400 people that show up at, over the course of the month at church. And as the first couple of weeks I was there, people were so surprised because it happened quickly once we started to behave a little bit better on Sunday, is someone said, so Winnie, how do you get all your friends to come every week, and how many weeks are they going to do this? That they felt so badly about themselves that they could not imagine that people would come to join them in what they were doing, right? Heartbreaking, heartbreaking. And I hope what we learned together over 6 years was the glory of that place, that people would come and within the first 5 minutes be in tears. And I'm going to tell you, for people that do church formulas about how to make things right, we did everything wrong. It was ugly inside. The carpets were kind of dirty, and if you worry about like bed bugs and hygiene, you'd worry about that carpet. We had blue plastic chairs with metal frames. They were just ugly. A bishop came from the West Coast, I think excited because she had heard about all the growth at St. Mark's, and looked around and said, "It's just so ugly." I know, I almost cried. It was before the service. But it's like, she was right. It was really ugly. Our furniture was dated. We got nothing right. But something about the sanctity of that space that was held around welcome would often mean that within the first 10 minutes of the service, new people were in tears. So it was such a shot to my vanity. 10 minutes in, I have said nothing interesting, right? Not much music has happened. We've read prayers. And we had somehow created a space that felt so holy and safe that people could bring their full selves, which is often in church a broken heart. So when you think about welcome and what it is in your community, what it is for you, I hope you will think about the things that you love, that you are passionate about, what draws you to the church, what has drawn you to the church, maybe not what draws you right now, what took you there in the first place, and how you might create in your community that kind of welcome, of real openness to literally whoever comes in. Now the other piece is, I could be as welcoming as I want in my apartment and nobody would know. Right? It doesn't really matter if I set it up really nicely and I'm ready for people to come in and I've got my best smile on and made a really nice meal. No, but even if I hung a sign outside, that would just be kind of creepy. I don't know if anyone responds to stuff like that. Come on up. You have to go out and make relationship, right? And that too ends up being a fairly difficult and biased and led by biased thing that most of us do. We're drawn to certain people. And we can imagine, because we're comfortable with them, whether they're like us or not, that they should be with us. One of the challenges for the church is that the church is for everyone. It was the lesson of St. Mary's for me. I expected to see a lot of people that look like my mom and our relatives. It's our church. And I felt that, our church. We were all dedicated to that place, mine. And I went and no one recognized me. No one saw me. Of course they wouldn't. There were millions of people there. But I felt it. I could feel it in myself, the sense that I should be welcomed home, that it's mine. It was mine. And it was 299,999 other people's as well. It was just an enormous number of people, millions and millions. So what might it mean if something is yours? Absolutely yours. And many, many, many other people's as well, in the place that feels closest and dearest to you. So as you know, you've probably read if you're in New York, maybe not if you're not from here, a woman, Deborah Danner, died this week here in the Bronx, and she was known to many of us. She went to many Episcopal churches. Actually, it's not an uncommon thing, probably in Long Island as well, but definitely in New York City, that there are people that just hop around to different churches. And everyone thinks they're a member because they show up so often at all of our churches that we think they're members of our church. But other churches know them equally well. Somehow they manage to be in a bunch of different places. And Deborah was one of those. She went on retreats. People knew what she thought about theologically because she ended up in the big conversations in her churches. She was also someone living with a mental health diagnosis, and we knew that. She was a part of one of our outreach programs as well. And she was having a pretty rough episode in her apartment in the Bronx, in her apartment building, Tuesday night. And the police were called, and they have been called before to her apartment because this has happened before. Her brother and sister have confirmed. She's 66 years old. And somehow, in the course of what should have been hospitalizing her, she was shot twice in the torso and died. So we all woke up to this news on Wednesday. I was on a plane. Really hard to bear. And not different than what we've been reading in our newspapers and in social media over the last couple of years. Really hard. Really, really hard. I like to think that at a place like St. Mary's at Manargat, you would take that broken heart and you wouldn't just leave it there. You would expect to be a part of something that shifts the world that we live in. And you'd start out with letting Mary know what you need. We're really clear about that at St. Mary's. You bring it all. You bring the thing that is impossible to heal, literally impossible, and you bring it over and over and over again. But people would think you were a fool if you also didn't go to the doctor down the street in that building that they built, or send your kids to that school or to that therapy. So the other piece of welcome, of radical welcome, is someone like Deborah felt welcomed in a bunch of our churches. We got that right. She felt welcomed. She felt able to say she was in a lot of need when she was struggling. She felt able to be in theological conversation with people that respected her and to take her spiritual life seriously. We got that really right. We should be so proud of ourselves. I suspect she went to other churches too that were not Episcopal, but we'll claim that. She felt welcomed by us. We got that really right. And I think it means in her death we're responsible. This is the challenge of welcome. So this is an extreme example, but I'm going to tell you that this is why most of us struggle with welcome. This is the part that we know. That if we end up in relationship with people that have different concerns than ours, different identities, engage power in a different way, live different realities, and that can be in any version of these shifts, right? At St. Mark's, it was people with a lot more privilege coming in. That we then have to figure out how to have the toughest conversations, the ones that this nation doesn't know how to have, about how to be community when we need one another. If we're going to be open-hearted and struggle at the table together, we would also need to know what to do when one of the dear ones known to us is murdered, killed. Didn't have to happen, says the mayor of New York. This is not my political position. It actually wasn't supposed to happen in that way. Most of us know how to have these really difficult conversations with people that agree with us. I do. I'm really good at that. Right? I can be really clever at those moments. I really struggle with having them with people who disagree with me, or if I don't know what you think. Really struggle. And my struggle actually is that I usually don't want to offend. You'll be surprised to hear. I want to know what everyone else thinks, and I want you to walk away thinking that I'm a thoughtful person. I'm more likely to do that than to say, what about the fact of how this woman died? And frankly, I don't want to see that side of myself. I suspect some of you have that in you as well. That is the real challenge of welcome, isn't it? That it'll work, not that it'll fail. If you opened your heart and instead of serving on the boring committee you're on, or maybe in addition to, you brought something you were passionate about to your church community. What if some people you don't like very much joined you in it? What if they took it in such a direction and took your church to such a place that it's still yours, but a lot of other people's as well? What if you're one of 3 million all of a sudden? What if it worked? My gut is, and the evangelicals know this, Jesus doesn't fail us. God doesn't fail us. But we are terrified of what it might mean if we truly followed. The great gift of our tradition is you don't have to. You can receive and you can sit back. The challenge of our tradition is if you sit back, it feels bad, right? Come on. You know this. When church doesn't work right, it feels really bad. We can't make you do any of these things. But the life of contentment, and usually that's all I'm shooting for, right? The life of happiness is that we take who we're meant to be and we meet our redemption in Jesus, the one that says that you were made for wholeness and you can have it. We will help you with it and we want to see it. We want to see you flourish. That you respond to that flourishing by seeking out others and welcoming them. Nothing I have said today is complicated. It's pretty dumb, doesn't really need a citation. It's really simple-minded. It's the work of the church, really hard work. I've worked in big places where we don't have to do it because there's enough numbers. We can do whatever we want, the numbers are there. When I had been in little places, when I was a college chaplain, if we couldn't get to the happiness, if we had someone that only had a story of horror, of sadness, of defeat, of brokenness, of complaint, it could break the community. That's what it means to be a college chaplain. Break it. We had to stay in a place where we were connected to why we were there. And at St. Mark's, frankly, everyone was after us. It was an important property. People wanted to use it. They wanted to take it from us. People were after us all the time. So if we lost our focus, why we were there, we were really actually vulnerable. There was pressure in those circumstances to stay connected to all of these things. Where I am right now, there's a lot less pressure, frankly. Way less pressure at Trinity Wall Street to worry about how we're going to get through day to day. It's actually not a worry that we have, right? All the bills will be paid. But all the bills can be paid and there can be no church. So the challenge for us is, at Trinity, and actually it is connected to this other challenge, is how do you want to be the church? What do you do with the fact that Deborah Danner isn't coming back? What do we do with the fact that we are an important and powerful convening voice in the city of New York? What do we do on her behalf? It's a question in front of us at Trinity right now. And for any of you, all of you, the deeper you go into your communities, the deeper you go into the places that you love and that you are, the deeper you go into the neighborhoods of your churches, we find ourselves aligned in those ways with people whose lives call us to something beyond what we can imagine we can accomplish. I can accomplish the Eucharist any kind you want, right? We know how to do that. We know how to make sure our churches are clean. We know how to make sure there's an appropriate coffee hour set up. We can print bulletins, some of us better than others. We can mow the lawn. I don't think we do that because we're bad or short-sighted. We do it because we know we can accomplish that. But the work of the gospel is actually nothing less than the restoration of creation. Yeah, it's not even like liberal theology. That's Orthodox theology. The restoration of creation. Yeah, you went to Cursillo and that's what it signed you up for. I'm completely serious. That's where you should be headed. That's how big your imagining should be. What part of that restoration of creation, the making right of everything that we see, is you're part of the work. So what the great spiritual advisors say and the teachers say is that you start with what you're passionate about, because that's how you've been wired. You start there. You start with your joy, and it will lead you to the rest. It seems counterintuitive because you can see the list in the newspaper, the things that you should be about, right? You can see it. But it's right up there with becoming someone who hands out the bulletins because there's a need for that. If it doesn't stir your soul in some way, if standing at that front, in the back of the church, at the front, wherever you do it, and welcoming people to worship God doesn't stir your heart in some way, it just doesn't matter that much, and it won't last, and might even be destructive. We had an usher at St. Mark's. He's probably still there, and I hope doesn't watch this video. We had one. A really good person, but actually functioned as a gatekeeper in our church. In a church that you wouldn't think had a gatekeeper, frankly, if you've ever heard of St. Mark's. It's a really funky place. It's a pretty funky gatekeeper. But stood there and kind of made it clear who was welcome and what you were welcome to do and not do. Managed to capture that. You've seen that in church. Maybe some of you do it, right? I was in a church once where a jogger who came in because they heard the music and was going to sit down was told by a woman in the back that he'd need to go take a shower and get dressed and come back. Yeah, he didn't come back. Yeah. But you know these people in your church, right? You know them. Again, it might be you. And she wasn't trying to be evil, right? She probably thought he would be more comfortable, it would be more appropriate. She would absolutely have been more comfortable. Absolutely. I think all these things are of a piece. You know, you don't get a St. Mary's in Manargat out of nowhere. And we are in the tough world in the Episcopal Church of having to reimagine ourselves. This is the truth. Unless you're in a place that's got 20,000 people on a Sunday, right? Most of us are having to figure out how to make it work. How do you make the building work and the place work and the community work? And you know you're doing the best you can. You know you are. You know you're working, at the very least you know you're working really hard, right? I know that. I know that about everybody. It's just the truth. But when we separate ourselves from our joy, we separate ourselves from our salvation. When we separate ourselves from our salvation, how can we see a vision of the salvation of creation that we can be a part of? See our place in it. Now, I don't mean to say that we're going to accomplish it, but that is the vision that is the key to our contentment. And that's what welcome is about. That comes from your heart. It's because you love. And I'm going to tell you, if you spend all your time in conflict and in chores that you hate, in tedium because you think that's what the church should look like, or others should make the church look like, you can't get there. So I'm just going to challenge you to get to that thing that you love. And if it means you put down something that someone else wants you to do, think you can call me about it. Just do it. I'm completely serious. You only have so much energy, right? This is it. This is your one short life, wild and precious. Do the thing you love. Do it shamelessly. Welcome others to the glory of life in Jesus the Christ that you have been invited into. And then figure out how to partner with them to live the lives in community that we are all meant to live. None of it is rocket science. Trust yourself. The church needs you. If you won't do that, we don't get to be the church. What I love about looking out at this room is when I was looking out at the evangelicals, I could kind of imagine what they might be passionate about. I really can't imagine it for you guys. I don't know. I actually don't know. And you're the folks I know. Like, these are Episcopalians. Like, this is my world. I literally don't know. I'm tempted to say, if you're to have some coffee, talk about it amongst yourselves. I literally don't know what it means, what it might mean. But I hope your church, more than it is today, and I know it is already some of this, is a place of joy for you. And where it is not, I hope there are some things that can be put down. I know it's not always possible, but I hope there are some. And if you hate everything I've said today, it's long, it's the end of the day. I just hope you'll think about why. Jesus saves us to be who God has created us to be, and God creates us, remember this from the Catechism, for God's delight. God is delighted in you. God delights in Deborah Danner. God delights in that man that shot 2 bullets into her body. What are we going to do? The church can hold that kind of tension and get it right. Doesn't excuse any action, right? Get it right. We can do that. The church, apparently, on Wall Street is surrounded by a community that, frankly, I would never have guessed that God was calling me to figure out how to love. Never, ever, ever. But that was my call, was to figure out what it looked like to love the people that work on Wall Street. I think it might mean calling them to some holiness, but love, right? You're in a community too. You probably have less excuse than I do to figure out who there is not yet loved and needs the love of your church. But I hope for all of you that it comes from a place of delight. So I don't know how you're going to expand Cursillo. I'm curious about it. I hope it's full of young people that throw bowls in the air and come up with weird things to make Cursillo exciting.
That happens on Saturday night.
Saturday, yeah. I should stay, right. Right, whenever the big procession around the Marriott happens, right? But I'm joking, and it's not impossible. What you all do is about the Spirit, right? The Spirit is what people know. They get that. People get it. If they're not getting it, it's not about, there's something to talk about. That's a conversation to have about what is difficult about that, because it's not. Those evangelical folks I met in Long Beach, they get the Spirit. They got that. You have a great gift among you. You do. You have it in your experiences. I hope it feels that way to you. I suspect it does. I hope it drives you out in the world. I hope it drives you out of this community. And not to sign people up for Cursillo, but to be a follower of Jesus out there. The world needs you desperately. Thank you.